Christine?
I am not the numbers person. I'm a lawyer. I don't know numbers that well. But one thing we have to do when we look at a budget, which I do where I work for a large company, and I have a budget for my department. And you have fixed costs every year. Those costs don't usually change too much. We have to make sure that the most important things are addressed first, and then we have to, and honestly, I don't know what the legislature has changed. But we have to look for creative ways for financing. Again, there are so many people in this community who want to help, who are ready and willing to step up and maybe fill in a gap. And I think we have to look to those people and look for creative funding. Grant writing. I mean, Principal Santo is like a great grant writer. Why can't we do more of that throughout the community?
Thank you. Mary?
I am also not a numbers person per se, unless, 6 + 7 and such. But in terms of a budget, I mean, yes, there are, like Chris said, I mean, there are fixed things that you're going to have to fund every year. And I do know that irregardless of whether it's a new thing that has changed, education and underfunding has been forever, for as long as I've been in education. So you have the Board of Ed needs to actively go after every single dollar that they can. Whether that is through getting more funding, whether that is through grant writing, they have to go out there and get as much money as they can for Collingswood Board of Ed, for Collingswood, because we're a small school district. We need every last dollar.
Thank you very much. Danny?
My first suggestion would be analyzing the budget from a values perspective. What are our values as a community? Where do we want our money allocated? I think if we look at a budget that way from the get-go, you could probably cut out a whole bunch of items from the start. With what's left over, you reallocate according to priorities. Do we have items in the budget that are really not priorities in the community, right? Do we really need police supervision with 5th graders and down, referring to the incident that you brought up previously, Matt? For example, analyzing the budget according to our values as a community would be my first step.
Thank you. Raymond?
So our business administrator, Beth Ann Coleman, is fantastic at what she does. I'm every year amazed by how she can figure out all of the different scenarios of where the state might cut money and how to make sure that we aren't cutting our teachers, because the overwhelming majority of our budget is our teachers. So there's unfortunately not a lot of wiggle room there. So we do a great job of being creative and thinking outside of the box already with our shared services agreements. I think we have more of them than anyone in South Jersey. We bring in, I don't really like to think of it this way with special ed, but we do bring in some money that way. I think our job is to advocate at the state level to bring funding up for everyone.
Thank you, that's time.
Get a real numbers question next time.
Okay. Since we ended on the note of special education, Mary, we'll start with you. I've gotten a couple of questions about inclusion in the classroom. Can you speak to the necessity for inclusion being a strong part of the curriculum in Collingswood, and how would you address those needs if you're elected, and what do you see them as being in this district?
Well, I don't know that I could speak specifically globally as the district. I can say that as a teacher in an inclusion classroom, I think it's the best way to go. It benefits both the general ed and the special ed students. I think that to think about, I think that there has been an idea of special ed being just one thing. It is not just one thing. So special ed students get services in lots of different areas, and when you have them in a classroom, it benefits the students as a whole. So I don't necessarily, I can't speak to, like I said, like what that necessarily looks like in Collingswood, but it is important.
Thanks very much. Does anybody else like to add and have 30 seconds to follow up?
Matt, if you could just clarify, what,
sure.
Are you asking us to comment on the state of inclusion
I'm just asking,
currently in the district?
Right, and are there needs that you feel should be addressed? Are there specific features of an inclusion program that you would recommend, that you would like to see the district include? Are there other aspects of making sure that, this is a principle of equity, as we've been discussing, that are not being met that you would like to see addressed, and would you, or how would you address that if you're elected to the board? Sure. Okay. Sure that.
I guess I'll just follow up with
you
my
may,
answer
sure,
then.
yeah.
I spoke to a gentleman in the near Sharp School just last week, and he was concerned about his preschooler with special needs that hadn't been allowed to start preschool because of the assistance that he needed in the classroom. He was completely unaware of the existence of a 504 plan or an IEP plan. According to him, he had been back and forth with several representatives in the district, several teachers, and trying to get his son placed in a preschool, and he had been unable to do so. I was the first person who had spoken to him about 504 plans and IEPs. He had no idea they existed.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Anyone else would like to add?
Yeah.
Greg, yeah.
I would say this is, inclusion in Collingswood is definitely an issue that needs to be addressed, and it's one of the reasons why I pushed for the equity committee, because it's a space that will allow people to have a more open dialogue about what that could look like. It's tricky with our 5 elementary schools, the way that they're set up, to have true inclusion the way that Mary teaches it. It requires duly certified teachers, or at least it requires more training on both the special education and the general education teachers' part, and that's a big commitment, and it's a financial commitment that we need to look into in college.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I mean, let me just say one thing real quick. So I think inclusion is really important. I think every child needs and deserves a good education. But to me, it also speaks kind of to a broader problem, which is, are we really servicing the needs of all the kids? Whether it's, a kid who's very talented to a kid who needs special services. So that's my word. I don't know if we're doing that. I think in some ways, in some of our elementary schools, we might not be.
Christine, can I give you a lawyerly question? Okay. So in March, we saw the National Student School Walkout, and this was students who were leaving their classrooms because they wanted to protest violence across the country that has become a hallmark of whatever America is right now, and guns. What I'd like to ask is, where do you view the rights of students as far as self-expression within the school district? How would you see their voices exercised in the context of the school environment? It's a direct question, so that you have 60 seconds to respond, and then if anybody else wants to add on, they can do 30-second rebuttals and comments afterwards.
Well, I have several of those walkout protesters sitting in the front row, some of my daughters. Honestly, I am very pleased to live in Collingswood, and I'm pleased to live in a community that supports the youth and their ability to stand up for what they believe in a peaceful manner. I guess shocked isn't the word, but the administration of the high school and middle school were just more than, they were open to it. We're not in the kind of community that we have to worry about our kids' civil rights being squashed in that respect. And their freedom of speech has been open and pleased. So, lawyerly, yes, we don't have that issue here, as I see it.
Thank you. Anybody else like to add?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say I was really proud to, I was at the walkout with Lucas, well, he was 4th grader then, and it was a really powerful event, and I know that the teachers worked with the kids to give them the opportunity to speak. I know some of the kids wished that they would have been able to to speak their mind a bit more, but we are in school, and so they did their best, but I was very proud of that event.
I would be really cautious saying that we don't have that problem here. I mean, I don't know if it's just like the 30-second thing, maybe you phrase it that way. But I think it's really important to educate kids to the effect that even when something is not happening to them directly, they can and should take responsibility and stand up and do whatever they can from their position. There's a social
It's time.
justice.
Thank you.
Can I just?
Mary, sure.
So I just wanted to say.
Give it 1 second, Mary. Sorry, before you start. That Paco is glorious.
I just wanted to say that I was really pleased with the way that Collingswood did handle it, because, not speaking about any other districts, but not all districts handled it that way in encouraging students to have their voice. We're growing little humans, so I think that we have to make sure that they understand that they have a voice and that they know how to use their voice. So I was pleased with it, and I think I would definitely support it.
Okay. Bill, did you want to?
I think it was great.
Okay, thanks.
I think it was great.
Just on the same follow-up, and maybe we'll take 45 seconds and go around for everybody. I know school security is also a very big concern for people, and that is sort of what prompted the walkout, was national gun violence. And while we haven't seen that so much here in this town, I would just like to ask if anybody has any thoughts on the current security needs of the district, and if there are things that they would make a focus of their office, if elected to the board. And we can start, Bill, if you'd like to field this one to begin.
I mean, honestly, I really don't have any concerns at this point. I think things are pretty safe at the school. And again, my child's at Tatum, so I think the school system does a good job. If anything, I would worry about us going too far. I mean, I don't think we should have a lot of police presence there. I'd be worried about that. And I've gone to some schools in Philadelphia, and it's kind of like this. We really don't want that.
Anybody have anything to add? Please.
I don't know. I know what the security systems are at the school, and that is something I want to look into if I'm elected to the board. But tangentially, I think Collingswood does a good job with the kids that they have. The teachers are so loving and caring, and I think they identify problems. You can't stop everything, obviously, but I think what we have in this community is a group of caring and concerned teachers who have their eyes open and take care of their children to hopefully prevent problems before they start.
Thank you. Anybody else like to add?
Yeah, my kids are at the middle school. I was slightly concerned at the beginning of the year when drawstring bags were prohibited. The kids are now carrying around 3 and 4 books and huge folders and all of their materials just in their hands around school. Because the drawstring bags are now seen as unnecessarily, they could contain some hidden objects or whatnot. I think we have to be really careful about putting on Band-Aid solutions and making ourselves feel like we're doing something when really the problem is much more legislative than that. It's much bigger than that, and we should lobby as a district instead of paying respects out on the field, which was very nice. Instead of just paying respects, actually lobby as a district.
Thank you.
I would just like to say, I think school safety is a huge issue, and it's not going to get smaller. I would like to know, I think actually finding out the current status of safety within the schools. I think that there should be a bare minimum of what you have to do to get into the schools in terms of showing ID, signing in. These are important steps. I also think that there is technology that exists. So no one, I'm not talking about a police presence in the school, but there's technology, and I'm sure within the community, there are people who have expertise in that technology, and that could be definitely utilized to make our schools safer for our kids. Because honestly, you can't just depend on teachers, covering your students, which is basically a lot of times that's what you're expected to do.
That's time. Thank you.
So we did advocate for against gun violence as a board. We passed a resolution right after it happened in a law that got sent to the state and beyond and everything. And that is something that I believe that the board should be doing more of. We certainly, there are more things that could be in place for security. I know that in the elementary schools, they're trying to work with the school secretaries to not just let it, if I know you, I'll let you in kind of thing. But we also have, I believe at the end of last year, or it is maybe being finished right now, the CCTV cameras are now everywhere, and I believe they are linked up with the police department, the outside of the buildings to help with that. So we're working on it, but it's, and unfortunately each budget cycle we have to add something else in.
I would like to ask a follow-up question, and this can be for anyone who's interested, but Reagan, we'll start with you. There was, while not necessarily a physical security issue this past year, we saw a big cybersecurity issue. There was a child that was lured by an adult who was contacting her through a web service that she used her school-issued Chromebook to access. So what are your concerns with cybersecurity at the district, and how being a one-to-one technology district has that, that added risk? Where do you see the burden of responsibility, the balance rather of responsibility between the household and the district? That is a direct question for Reagan, and then anybody who wants to follow up can do the 30-second follow-up. Thanks.
Yeah, the balance part of it is tough and it's tricky because I think so. Cybersecurity is a very important deal, and my kid doesn't have a Chromebook that he brings home yet, so I am not quite as aware of what they have access to in that way just yet. I'll be learning that next year, but I know that the district needs to make sure that they are doing everything they can to have those Chromebooks as locked down as possible, and maybe that includes having more parent education about what taking Chromebook home looks like. What, we do technology resources in the school with the kids. Maybe we need to do that with the parents too, so they know what sites not to be using, how to
That's
lock
time.
down, stuff like that.
Thank you. Anyone else like to add in, please?
Yeah. I would say that none of us in this room who are parents had cell phones when we were in middle school or in high school, not to mention elementary school. So I think as a parenting issue, it's difficult because it's not something that any of us have a reference point for. It's not anything that we grew up and have a model as to how our parents handled that with us. I really think it has to start from the bottom as a parent education process. Let's talk about and educate parents as a community how to handle that.
Thank you.
So in my workplace, we have, we always have a big issue with cybersecurity. One of the things they do is send out these emails.
Can you speak up?
They send out emails at work, and if you hit the email and you open the attachment, you get like flagged for phishing, right? Now I know this because I got caught doing it, so yeah, big sign, so it says sign out. So I just think there's some tools that we might be able to use, software tools we might be able to use to really help in aiding cybersecurity. I think we should try and use.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Danny, I'll ask you this one. This is a direct question. You mentioned in your platform that you believe in the value of the arts and theater education as a big bridge for a number of services for children, and I'd just like to hear you talk a little bit about that, and then anyone else who'd like to follow up may do so.
I am a huge proponent of using theater to integrate multidisciplinary areas of study. There's writing involved, there's reading involved, there's history involved. Depending on the story you're telling, there could be science and math involved. There's social issues involved. It's really a no-brainer as far as getting kids to have fun with what they're doing, getting a project-based evaluation, project-based assessment out of it, having them work in groups, having them work in teams, rehearsing, and all the while they want to do it and they're having a great time doing it. And they're getting the core content that we want them to get in the process. So I am a huge proponent of theater. Collingswood is a huge theater town. We've already seen hundreds of kids are signing up for theater every year, but it's a patchwork. It's not something that we have as a cohesive plan or approach yet.
Anybody else like to weigh in? Okay. Bill, one of the things you mentioned in your platform was describing a need to create guiding metrics and performance indicators in the district in order to measure achievement gaps. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that. And then if anyone else would like to follow up, you can have 30 seconds.
So, again, this has a lot to do with my work experience. In the corporate world, we have to have metrics and key performance indicators to kind of see how successful we are. I think that's really important. I think we need to be able to frame how successful we are. And we can do that through metrics and key performance indicators. So some of the key performance indicators we can look at, which are just kind of obvious, or like graduation rates, absenteeism. But some of the other soft ones, which I'm hearing about, is like, for instance, grit and passion. I mean, I'm really interested to see how we can kind of use that as a quantitative tool to judge how our kids are doing. I'll say that we have to do pre-K program. I think it's a really good time for us to get excited and try and think about how we want to educate these kids, and look at the gap that these kids might have. And then
That's done. Thank you. Anyone else like to add?
Yeah, so I think we have all of that data as a district, because every school district has all of that data through the New Jersey performance reports that are generated, that school districts have to keep attendance data and graduation data, and so I think it's more about what we do with it. And that's something that I hope that we can look at in the equity committee to see where are the areas where we need to add something.
Thanks.
can I have a follow-up?
You have to wait for everybody else to go. Is anyone else? Sorry, when it comes to you, you have to wait till the end. Go ahead. Mary, did you want to say something?
Okay. I was just going to say, obviously, I mean, you have to gauge student growth. You have to make sure that you are preparing students for the future. But I just think that you have to be careful to not see students as multiple data points, because they are little people or bigger people. So I just think that it's, data is important, but what you do with the data is also important. And you don't want to be putting limitations, unnecessary limitations on teachers by overwhelming them with data.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll go so Bill can have a chance to rebut whatever he wants to rebut. I mean, data is important. Statistics are important. I'm much more of a proponent of, again, project-based learning and assessment than I am of standardized tests. I think we spend way too much time prepping standardized tests, and again, putting that pressure on teachers to do that prep and to do that testing, when we could get much better measurements of what our children can really do.
Thank you.
With project assessment.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I think we got to stop being afraid of measurements and numbers. I think that's part of the problem. I mean, we have metrics. I mean, I have metrics in my own group. I haven't hit them every time, but I do understand, oh, you didn't hit them because of what? Because something happened. I think we just need that to have some guiding approach, how we really conduct ourselves. And I don't know if anybody's seen it, which is like our 2020 vision. Well, it's a bunch of things that say we believe that all students, therefore, but it's got no numbers.
That's time.
It doesn't really mean
That's
anything.
time. Thank you.
Unless you have
That is time.
Can I ask something about
Sure.
that?
If Christine, did you have something to say? We have to give you the opportunity first. Okay. Thank you. Reagan.
So no, I just wanted to say I think kind of what both Danny and Mary were saying, that what I'm proud about this district is that they have come up with a way to measure how students are doing on a daily basis using some kind of creative technology with this Fast Bridge and Illuminate that we've begun doing this year. It can give them real-time information about where a student is, what reading level they're on, and whether they've met that standard so that they can move on to the next.
And that's time. Thank you. Christine, you had a note in your platform about describing the need for greater student support systems, and you wrote in our candidate questionnaire, plug for njpen.com if you want to read more about where these candidates stand on a handful of boilerplate issues. You can check it out. But Christine, you wrote that you would reevaluate how the district addresses the needs of students with emotional and behavioral issues and provide support and direction to their parents and caregivers who may not know where to turn to begin addressing these needs. I'd like to hear a little bit about that, and that's a 60-second, and then anyone who would like to follow up afterwards may do so for 30 seconds.
I've worked with the youth of our town around since my oldest was in first grade when I was a Girl Scout leader. We started a troop. I've been involved in Odyssey of the Mind, coaching dozens of kids through the years. And I've known these kids. And now that they're getting older, and I see that some of them are having issues. Not just the kids I know, obviously, but parents are having a struggle finding out where to turn for some of these support systems that they need. These aren't new issues. We have made strides. We now have a nurse in every grade school. I think we should think about what we can do to help parents in different ways, whether it's a social worker, whether it's some kind of liaison that they can use as a reference to give them the resources that they need to help their kids. It's just a personal issue I've seen, and I think even well-educated parents, any parent, does not necessarily know where to turn when they're having these problems.
Thanks. Anyone like to add something?
I was really glad to see that we added the position for community liaison, because chronic absenteeism in a couple of our different elementary schools and then a little bit into the middle school and high school are issues. And this was a way to, it was someone we have kind of two different positions, one in the community, one in the school district, that can go into the parents' homes, talk to them, figure out what the problems are. So I was happy to see something like that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Mary, there was a note in your platform where you just described, that because resources may be scarce, there is an encouraging of the idea that only specific students should benefit from services, and you would like the district to re-examine the way that resources are allocated and not assume because something has been done one way that is the only way. I would just like to hear a little bit more about how you feel the district is allocating its student resources and where, if anywhere, you foresee a deficit.
I would say that I think that it's not an issue that only faces Collingswood. I think that in education in general, it's the parents that are the loudest that maybe possibly get the resources for their students. And I do think that parents are told, and I know this from my own experience as well as from experiences from friends and from people I've met at meet and greets, that, oh, well, your kid will be okay. Your student doesn't need that. And that's simply not the case. So I do think that there needs to be an examination of, are we meeting the needs of all the students? And I think also what Bill had said, which is, are we meeting them at the high end as well? Like, so, like my son had a need that wasn't addressed, but also like, are we expanding the students? So I do think that making sure that we're not just falling into the routine of we've always done that in Collingswood, so that's what we're going to do. That's just never a good answer.
Thank you, that's time. Would anyone else like to add?
I agree with Mary on a couple points. It is usually the loud parents who get what they want. I think that's always been that way. But I think there's an education piece there. Like I mentioned before, there's parents who don't know that they have to be loud. They don't know what to be loud about. They don't know what questions to ask. So there has to be an education piece there at the same time that there's an expectation that we speak up and ask for what we need.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add? No?
Can I just follow
You may.
up? Yeah. I agree 100% that I think that parents, it's unfortunate that parents have to fight and they don't even know that they have to fight. So I do think that, like you're saying, like I'm not saying that it's just because, I happen to know that I have to be loud. Like, you shouldn't have to be that way. If your child needs it, your child should get it to the best of the ability of Collingswood.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, why are they fighting? They shouldn't have to fight. We should be helping them identify their kids' needs, and we should be helping them identify the resources. I don't see why there should be a struggle. That they have to yell the loudest to be helped. That's amazing.
Anyone else?
Just to respond to that, I don't know if we're, I don't even know if I said the word fight, maybe, I'm not sure. But I think what we're referring to is being loud, speaking up that there is a need that exists. My children personally were we speak Spanish at home as well as English. They were in basic language classes. They were bored out of their minds. I went to the school, I asked them, you know, we sat down, had an hour-and-a-half meeting, they were very receptive. End conclusion, my kids are taking now high school level
That's time.
Spanish classes.
Thank you. That's time. Thank you very much. I would like to hear, Reagan, we'll start with you and then we'll work our way through. Since you have described the equity committee as a particular pet issue, could you please describe what the need is for the equity committee and what do you see are the equity issues for the district? We'll start with you and then this will be a 45 and we'll go on down the line to Bill and Christine and then back around, okay?
Sure. So I think probably every school district needs an equity committee, truthfully. You're going to have issues or gaps, but we have a unique school around here that we don't have a homogeneous group of students. And we are aware of that, but maybe there's some uncomfortable parts of it that we're not always fully aware of or talking about. And you know, you look at the 5 different elementary schools and people have different stories about which elementary school they'd like their kids to go to and which they wouldn't. And I have been to all of them and don't see that as the case. And so I looked at this committee as a way to raise awareness, to figure out what we could do to
That's time.
help things.
Thank you. Bill?
So I really think I really like what the equity committee is doing. I guess my concern is the process itself. I'm unsure whether teachers are fully engaged with it. I've talked to some of them and they're saying, yeah, we do this anyway. So that's a little concern with me. I know when I'm trying to deploy a system at work, I have to get the operators buy-in, the frontline people buy-in. You know, I'm not too sure we're doing that. I mean, it's again, it's the engagement piece that's kind of missing. You know, we need to engage people to really be doing this. And the other thing is I've read the book and I wasn't sure whether there were any surveys done. I don't know, but I'd like to hear more if there were. So again, I'm more concerned with the process. I think building equity is great.
Thank you, that's time.
I probably talked to different teachers than Bill because some of them are excited about it. I'm sure some people, but it's new, and I think it's just another way, the equity committee, to listen to the people out, to listen to the parents, to listen to the community, and see what they see as the needs to be. As Reagan was saying, you know, there's 5 different elementary schools. I think as part of this committee, what works good in one school can be transferred to another school. If one teacher does something a certain way, why can't they all talk to each other? It's my understanding that they don't necessarily all sit down and compare notes. I think that could be a way to spread what works at Sharp to Zane or vice versa. And I think this is a great start, and that's I'm excited about it too.
Thank you. Mary?
No, okay. Well, I mean, obviously, I think that it's important and it's a good idea, obviously. But I mean, like Chris said, all of our elementary schools are not the same. They're not cookie cutters, but all students in the elementary schools should have the tools they need to be successful. It shouldn't matter which elementary school you go to. And I do think that there is great teaching happening at every single school. I think that possibly getting some teacher-to-teacher training. So, like Chris said, if something's being done really well at one school, let's get somebody trained in another school so that same thing can be copied. I mean, it just makes sense. You have expertise, why not use it?
Thank you, Dan.
I recently spoke to a couple families from Sharp and Garfield, and they expressed concern that their funding at their schools was not quite the same because there was this brilliant principal at Zane North who was doing this great grant writing, and why weren't they getting grant writing done at their school? What was born of that conversation was basically a suggestion to get the principals of each school together, or even a representative from the faculty, whatever turns out to be the best choice. Get them together in a monthly meeting, get them to express what their best practices are at the moment, what their challenges are at the moment, and let there be a sharing, a meeting of the minds and a sharing of ideas between them.
Thanks, that's time. Okay. Sure, go ahead.
So, first of all, it's a big plug that anyone that is interested, anyone up here that's interested should really come because we have 50 people there. The majority of the room are educators. We had educators from every single school, including Oakland and Woodland. And I think There's not only buy-in because they've already been working with this for a while, but they all seem to be pretty excited to then go back and share in their own schools.
Thanks. And just as an aside from the timed piece of the conversation, the Equity Committee is a subsection of the Board of Education, correct? That is designed to work on issues of inequity in the school district, whether those are achievement gaps or resource distribution or specific needs that are facilities driven. And if you want to participate in the...
I was going to say it's made up of parents, there are board members there, but it's parents, it's community members, it's teachers, everybody.
Okay, and if people want more information about the Equity Committee, where can they find that out?
They should go to the Contact Us section of our website and give us their...
Sorry, which website is that? The district website?
Well, I don't have it personally.
Right, I'm just that. Okay. School district
The school
is
district
the, okay. Making sure that we're clarifying, we had some questions from the crowd. The Equity Committee is not like a grassroots organization, it's run through the school district. Okay, so you guys can reach out.
And we would love to, we will get in contact with you.
Thanks very much. Anyone else have anything to add?
Well, again, I'm concerned about this process. I'm hearing parents are not engaged, and they're concerned, and some teachers are engaged. Again, I think really the Board of Ed, we really need to work on that engagement up front. And I don't think that's happening as thoroughly as it should. I mean, maybe from a regular point of view it is, but that's what I'm concerned about. And when you start something new like this, we got to make sure that, you know, our partners are engaged. And I'm concerned about that.
Anyone else?
Because I want it to succeed.
Thank you. Bill, I'll start with this one with you. We asked Danny about the value of performing arts. I know athletics are near and dear to your heart. Would you like to take a little bit of time and just explain to the public where you view the role of recreational or school-based athletics in children's education, and where you think the needs of the district might be on this particular front?
Well, that's a really kind of difficult question for me because I am very passionate about it. I mean, I have all my children have played some type of sports, except for one who's does sailing. So, I mean, I think the issue though is that we've kind of come to a point where it seems that either you pick you're an ally or a fan of athletics, or you're an ally, a fan of arts, and I don't see them that way. I actually see them as a kind of more of a whole picture. I mean, I want my kid who does theater, goes to and does watercolor, and is a soccer player. I want kids, all kids have the opportunity to have everything, you know, have the opportunity to do everything. So I don't really kind of see it in that you're the sports guy. That's not how I see myself. I see myself as somebody who really wants a good education for all kids, and they're going to have the opportunity to do athletics, arts, and academics too.
Thank you. That's time. Anyone else like to weigh in?
Can I just say,
Sure.
As a teacher, I think physical education is integral part of my students' day, and it's really, really important for them. So I don't know that I know necessarily the magic ratio of how much time they have gym versus how much time they can sit still in their seats, but I do think it's a really important part of my students' day.
Anyone else? Mary, let's follow up on that because I've got a question here about mulch. Just would like to ask, I know we talked a little bit about the facilities referendum. We got the mulch truthers out there. I would just like to know, what is your take, and we can go down the line for anyone else who'd like to add anything. What is your take on the needs at the elementary school level for physical education, outdoor enrichment, condition of the playgrounds, those things? I know the question was specifically about what is going to be done for the removal of the mulch, but without presupposing a mulch-related outcome, I'd just like to ask more broadly, what do you think the kids' needs are for getting outside and playing, and what's the condition of the district facilities to support that?
I would say I think that that any teacher you ask will say the very same thing. Kids need to get outside. They need to get outside, and it doesn't necessarily need to be just getting outside to play. I mean, I took my students outside today for science, and we did a shadow scavenger hunt. I think that there are ways to use outside, and I think that the kids love it. So I can't speak to, I mean, I'm not on the board, so I can't speak to the current status of the elementary schools, but like their outdoor play spaces. But I think if there is any way that those can be improved, and it doesn't necessarily have to come from some sort of funding, but I think that parent volunteers, let's get people engaged, people want to help. But yes, 100% students need to be outside.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I mean, I completely agree with that. Tatum is doing, they've just started to put together their outdoor classroom, and it looks great with like a little, they're using tree stumps to sit on, so it's not cost them as much money, and yeah, the kids need to be outside as much as we can safely allow them to be, I think, and the more breaks that they can take, the better.
Can I put my athletic hat back on?
Sure.
So I actually like, I mean, I want kids to play outside as much as possible. I think what we should be doing is actually increasing our recess time. I think for a lot of the elementary schools, it's like 30 minutes. I really don't think that's enough. And also, I think it'd be policy for, recess is not uniform. If there's a slight bit of rain, they don't go out. I don't know, if that's really fair to some of the kids. So again, I would say more recess under whatever.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just to dovetail on that, I think we might function under an assumption that only little kids want to get out and play. My kids are older, they're in middle school. They don't go outside for recess. They get 20 minutes to eat, and they get 20 minutes or 26 minutes to sit in advisory, which now is like our generation's homeroom. They sit in their homeroom, they're on their phone, they're on the computer, they're chit-chatting with their friends, but they don't go outside. They don't get fresh air.
Thank you.
I think
That's
it's
time.
assumed they don't need that. They do.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Christine, we'll start with you, but we're going to ask everybody this question. One of the issues that's currently being considered at some neighboring districts is the idea of grade level schools. Grade level schools, for folks who don't understand or don't know, is the process of finding a way to put all of your kids who are in the same grade levels in one building. So with the distributed facility of Collingswood having 5 elementary schools, it's possible you could reorganize them in a way that would put all the pre-K to 2 kids together, all the 3 to 4 kids together, all the 5 and 6 together, and so forth. And there's different advantages and disadvantages to doing something like that. I would just like to hear, going down the line, the candidates' opinions on whether grade level schools would be a good fit for Collingswood, and whether this is something that you could foresee the board tackling in the next few years.
Thank you very much for the hot button.
Do you want
I did.
I'm probably the only person in this room, by the way, who lives in a grade level school district, so if you want to ask me questions about that later.
I did read your coverage of how it went over in our neighborhood school district, so to be quite honest with you, it is, I can put my parent hat on, but if I'm going to be elected to the school board, I have to look at it universally. I have a gut reaction, but as a school board member, you're supposed to take all the data and analyze it and see what you come out with. It's, honestly, Collingswood's a walkable school district, and that would be the biggest issue that I see with it. But this is a hot potato, and I will pass it along to my colleagues.
Yeah, everyone gets a chance to handle that hot potato. Thank you very much.
I mean, I actually do like the idea of the grade level school. I just don't think that Collingswood has the appetite for it. I think it's unfortunate. I really do. I think it really, this whole building equity thing, that could be solved right away with just grade level schools. So yes, but no. I mean,
It's a very politician.
I mean, it's science of being a politician is a little scary, but yeah, I mean, it's a great idea, but it would never fly. So again, it's about engagement. So what's like the critical mass of you parents out there who think that it's a good idea?
Thanks. Reagan?
So I mean, that was, I certainly thought about this when we were talking about the equity committee, because yeah, if we want to answer half the questions that an issue that will do it, I think the answer has to be that we have to find out what the Collingswood community is ready for and what they aren't. And learning from Haddon Heights is a great way to go. And really reaching out to the community in every way possible to see what their thoughts are on it and take it from there.
At nights is not the way to introduce that issue,
Right,
just for
exactly.
anyone
So we've
who's
learned
not
that.
clear on that, yeah. We're gonna let everybody come through and then please follow up. Yeah, Danny?
Yeah. I'm originally from California, and I lived through the transition to year-round schools. So I saw that happen and all of the complications and community input that went into that. Grade level schools can work. They have a lot of advantages. Personally, the main disadvantage that I would see in Collingswood, like you said, Christine, is a very walkable town. And aside from just walking the half mile or the 3/4 of a mile, whatever, I very much value kids having the independence of being able to go back and forth to school by themselves. And I'm not sure if families would be into giving them that independence if it meant walking from Sharp all the way to Zane.
Thank you. Mary?
I mean, I agree with what everybody has said already. I think that asking Collingswood sort of what it thinks is a good place to start. I would say that I think that the K-5 model also has some benefits for kids. I see that, you know, in my own everyday experience, you know, there's 5th graders and 4th graders in my building, and they reach out to the younger students, and it kind of like it has mentoring just built right in for them. You know, we have them out on the playground, and they're doing mediation for the, you know, the 1st graders who are having a hard time with Foursquare. So it's just, you know, there are also benefits to the K-5 model. So.
Thanks. Did you have a follow-up as well?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill and then Christine. Thank you.
Yeah, I just think it's disheartening and almost unacceptable that we have a segment of our population that's just not getting, you know, not being grade level shit. I think we need to do something about it. And I don't know if grade level, you know, schools are the answer, but it's something we really need to think of. So it's like helping your neighbor.
Thank you.
What did you say?
Sure, I'm sorry.
I think it's disheartening that some of the elementary schools aren't performing as like other elementary schools, and that's really kind of where I'm at with it. I mean, and I don't know if that means grade level schools, but you know, we gotta find a way as neighbors, you know, as our community, to kind of find a way to level the playing field. So that's what I'm saying.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Christine.
You kind of caught me off guard with that question, but even if Collingswood isn't ready for that in the next year or 5 years, but there's things we can do to mimic what's good about a grade level school, and I think we talked about it before. What works at Sharp? What works at Garfield? What teachers have innovations? I mean, we could work that way to make sure that the kids in different schools get the same services and the same quality of education.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add? Okay. Thank you. So, Mary, we'll start down there with you, and this is sort of on the tail of the grade level school question. We've seen a modified version of integration with the Oakland School District. Eventually, because of the way that the smaller school districts in New Jersey are funded, what happens is there's great volatility in the amount of money available every year for budgeting, because if you gain a kid, it's an extra $12,000 or $14,000. If you lose a kid, that's $12,000 or $14,000 enough to spend to educate them. So in small districts where you have to provide this education, it can be highly variable from year to year. So coming around to it, where do you foresee in the next 3-year term that the connections between the Collingswood and Oakland School District merging? I don't mean the districts merging. I see the more close integration, as we've seen. Now there's more middle schoolers from Oakland will be joining Collingswood. I'm sorry, 45, yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Sure. Oakland is sending more of its kids now to Collingswood. There's an expansion of the send-receive agreement. So I'm saying in the next 3-year term that 3 of you will hold, where do you foresee the integration of that, you know, increase of the send-receive between the 2 districts going? And do you foresee it expanding further? Any issues, concerns, things like that?
Oh, okay. Well, I think that it probably will expand further because, as you said, I mean, it only makes sense if you have a limited amount of resources. We kind of have to pull it together. I think that there were some concerns as a parent of a 6th grader with sort of how it rolled out this year. It was somewhat bumpy at the start. So I do think that the communication of those things needs to happen in a better way. I do think that's really the only issue that I know of as on a personal level in terms of the expansion of that.
Okay, Dan?
I see two issues with that mainly. I'm going to try to cover them in 30 seconds. I think the integration into the middle school was not presented in a way that made it exciting for the kids. I think they saw it as sort of an intrusion, maybe, in some ways. Their schedules were being modified, and their teachers were being taken away, and they were being switched around, and they were suffering all of these horrible things. So I think that the presentation of those kind of issues has to be more, if it can't be avoided, which in this case it couldn't, the presentation of it needs to reflect the reality.
Thank you.
So my understanding is that we have it mapped out for the next 3 years in terms of numbers and how it will grow. And my understanding, just knowing Bill Stouts, who's our representative on the board, is that they will fight till the death to keep their K-5 schools at least. So I don't know that that's going to be an issue in the next term for any of us, but it certainly will be something that, I mean, I feel like all of the tiny towns in South Jersey are going to have to wrestle with eventually. And I think it's great for our kids that they're all being integrated sooner. I like that even in 4th and 5th grade, it's no longer called Panther Choir, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the new one, but it includes the Oakland kids. And I think that's great because it's starting even sooner.
Thank you, that's time. Bill?
So I guess my real concern was the scores that were coming out of that. And I think if we're going to do something like that, we've got to make sure that they have the support they need. There's going to be gaps, and I think in some of the public schools they were a little bit behind. So I think we need to just really think about thoughtfully those kids in the road and how we.
Thank you, Christine.
My middle schooler said it was a little bumpy, a little crowded, but they're getting used to it. And I really think long-term, like you're talking about scores, getting kids from Oakland in the Collingswood curriculum earlier benefits them and benefits their future classmates because they're integrating sooner, they're meeting each other, they're becoming more cohesive. And I think that the scores will start to level off because the kids are getting exposed to the curriculum that they're going to be ultimately responsible for learning through the grade through middle school and high school.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything to add? Please, yeah.
I just want to add that I think we really do need to present the positive sides to this and not just look at it from a negative perspective. We're getting in from Oakland and Woodland. We're moving from a 5% to almost a 15% families who speak another language at home, for example. That's a huge opportunity for Collingswood, for example, to be sending more kids to take the AP exams, up our ratings as a school system because we have more kids who take and pass them.
Thank you very much.
I know that the Oakland School District, because we share a superintendent, is really done a lot of work to streamline their curriculum, and the hope is that as they enter middle school now, it will be an even more seamless process. And what's also great is that the Woodland School District has a new principal/superintendent, because they're not that big of a district, who is very excited and willing to work with us to try to streamline some of their curriculum.
Thank you, that's time.
I was going to say
Oh, that's 10, excuse me. I misread. You can have 10 more seconds if you want. Okay, thank you, forgive me. I'm so glad you're not on third base and I'm coming around second. I would not know to stop. Does anyone else have anything else to? No, you can get those 10 seconds afterwards, I'm sorry. Anyone else have anything to add on the issue? Okay, one more play all and then we're going to close it out. I think we've worked through everyone's questions pretty well and candidates have been very generous and I believe forthcoming. So the last question we'll ask, and Mary will start with you and work our way down. Actually, I'm sorry, Christine will start with you and work our way down, and then Mary will start with the closing comments and work our way down with you. So this is the question about the pilot program that allows homeschooled kids in 6 to 8 to participate in activities. There are homeschooled kids in your town, guys, and everybody sends their their kids to the public school, and it's been a sticking point for those who aren't aware of getting them to actually participate in the district activities for extracurriculars, for recreation, for athletics, field trips, things like that, that help them connect with the other kids in town. So for each of the candidates, what is your position on the inclusion of homeschool students in the school district, and do you support an expansion of the program to include other grades and extracurricular activities? Christine, we'll start with you, and we'll work our way down for everybody. Thanks.
I see some of my favorite homeschoolers in the audience today. What I really liked about the board this year was that they didn't just slam the door on something like this. They decided to try it. They got a pilot program going, and the floodgates did not open. We have one very talented cross-country runner in middle school right now. I think it's great. I think you pay your taxes. The issues that we foresee that the board had foresaw were, do we have enough staffing? Do we have enough, at least at the high school level? How are you going to work with the grading? But this is a good way that we've been able to get it kicked off, and hopefully they'll keep going with different activities going forward.
Thank you. Bill?
Yes. So yeah, I think it's a great. I think it's a great thing. My only concern again is, I think it actually took to. I know we were talking about the 2017. I don't know why it's a pilot program. I know they want to work out some kinks, but I think we should just make it like a program because I think it's working as it is. So in the end, we're only worried about 10 kids, but it took a long time to get there. I think that the board really needs to work on the bigger picture of it. That was kind of small.
Thank you very much. Reagan?
This is a great example of needing to build consensus on the board, because part of why it didn't happen sooner is you have to have a majority of people in favor of it, and that took some time and some education. And the pilot program was the way to get things started so that others on the board could see the floodgates have not opened and disaster has not struck. It's been one cross-country runner. And it's also for kids who go to private schools, and the sport is not offered there as well. And so that was something to take into consideration as we got into high school. And I believe that the plan is to continue expanding.
Thanks. Danny?
Honestly, when I first heard of this issue, when my son is involved in recreational activities with some homeschoolers, so we've been talking about the issue for some time. I really didn't even understand why it was an issue. The families pay taxes; their taxes go into the schools. Those services come out of the schools. It really shouldn't be an issue. Apparently, the issue was. The counter argument was, how are we going to measure the academic level of those students? Are they keeping their grades up to snuff like the kids in the public school have to do to be able to participate in extracurricular activities? But I think that there's plenty of measures that we could use to get a clearer conclusion on that.
Thank you. That's
it
time.
shouldn't be such a challenge.
Mary?
So, I agree with everybody. I'm not really sure why it's an issue. It shouldn't really be an issue. I do think it requires, obviously, there has to be flexibility on the part of, on both parts. There has to be flexibility. And honestly, I would need to educate myself more about what some of the issues were, talking to some of the homeschool families to kind of find out what were the issues, what are you facing, and how can we make it smoother. It doesn't make sense to me, I guess, that it's an issue.
Anyone have anything to add?
Yeah, I think in 2017 we should have started the pilot program. I don't think it should have waited that long. I think we should be advocating for all the homeschool and non-traditional student positions.
If I could just add, Matt, I really think the work of the board is to represent the community. We're not electing 3 people now or anybody else in the future to make decisions for the community. We're electing representatives of the community so that we can do what the majority of the community wants done at the schools, not necessarily what the majority of those select few want done.
Anyone else? Okay, so we're now going to give everybody 90 seconds to close it out, and Mary, we'll start with you and work our way back down to Christine. The time is yours, and when Rhodes gives you the 10 and then the 5 and then that's it. Okay, And everyone, I want to just take this minute to thank everybody in the audience for paying attention, for being so up-putting with my quirks and stuff like that. And thanks for all the great questions. Thanks to our candidates. Thanks to CEAG. Thanks to St. John's. This has been really good. So, Mary, please, your 90 seconds for closing.
Okay. So, I would just like to say in closing, I think that Collingswood schools have really positively impacted both of my children. I've seen tremendous things happen with them, and I think that the teachers and the schools deserve a lot of credit for that. I feel that I have skills, I have skill sets, I have talents that could really benefit the board, and I also feel like I don't have all the answers. I feel that getting out, addressing the community, and kind of getting feedback from members of the community, that's what I would see my role as a member of the board. Not just to say, well, I know everything and so we'll do it my way, although, sometimes that would be nice. But no, it just, that's not the way the world works. So we have to have transparency and we have to engage the community, so.
Thanks. Danny?
My platform has been put diversity to work. And I think in Collingswood we have a huge diversity of people, population, cultures, religion, ideas, talents, professions, backgrounds. We have such a huge diversity of people that is really not being taken advantage of with respect to educational policy and how we're receiving feedback and using that feedback to improve our programs. We have a great school district. I am not one to settle down, and I've decided to settle down in Collingswood because it's such a great town. I've bounced around my whole life, and I'm ready to settle here and have my kids graduate high school here. But I want that to be the best experience possible. The reason I'm in Collingswood is because of that diversity. I think we really need to start using it. Take advantage of the communication, take advantage of the proposals that community members can make, feedback they can give, and really start integrating that into the educational policy we're putting into motion.
Thank you, Reagan.
First, I wanted to thank everyone for taking an hour and a half out of the night before Halloween to come and learn more about all of us. Next, I wanted to thank my fellow candidates for putting themselves out there, because I don't know about all of you, but I'm really glad that there's a movie left before Election Day. My husband calls me a reluctant politician. I'm not comfortable campaigning. I'm really not comfortable in the spotlight. I wish I could be more articulate and a better speaker. In fact, if you put me in a room full of kids, I suddenly would be. It's why I became a teacher. I love education, and I missed it. So that's why 3 years ago, despite being scared out of my mind, I ran for the school board. So while public speaking may not be my thing, as some of you have learned tonight, I found consensus building is. And that's very important when you're in a room full of 11 people needing to make decisions that are best for our kids. That's what I've tried to do for the past 3 years, and that's what I'll continue to do if I'm fortunate enough for the next 3. So that is why I'm running again, and why I hope that I have earned your vote on Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill?
So Dana was talking a little bit about diversity. I think that's really important. And first of all, I do want to thank you, Matt. I want to thank CEAG. I want to thank everybody for coming. But diversity to me means a lot of different things, but it also means diversity of experiences. And we have a lot of educators on the board, and it doesn't seem to me that we have enough scientists, people with scientific and technical background. I think we need that. I think one thing I haven't heard or we didn't get questions about was sustainability. I think that's a really, really important thing when it comes to the future. And sustainability gives you everything. It gives you science, it gives you math. And you can save money too. I think that we need. I think my mother was an educator, so I know how hard that job is. But I think we need more diversity on the board. So and I know kind of what the skills are needed to be successful scientists. So that's all.
Thank you. Christine?
Like Bill, I am not a professional educator, and I think I slipped it in because my intro I was a little nervous. But I've been a lawyer for 25 years. But that gives you a lot of skills. It gives you reasoning. You work well with others. I manage a team of people across the country. But what I really think qualifies me to be on the school board is because I'm a mom. I'm a mom to these 3 kids who have sat through this very patiently, not on their phones, thank you very much. I've had 31 first days. I have a 7th, 9th, and 11th grader. They've been in Collingswood since day 1, actually preschool for the little one. The other 2 started in kindergarten. And I love this district, and I love this community, and I think that my role as a board member would be, as Reagan said, to build consensus. It's not my way or the highway. It's a group of 11 people, 9 from Collingswood, Oakland, and Woodland, working together to see what's best for the kids and best for the community. And I think that the board moving forward has learned some things in the past few years, and we're going to be a lot more open, and we're going to be listening to the community. And again, thank you all, and again, I hope I earned your vote on Tuesday as well.
So I want to thank everybody for coming out. Can we please give a big round of applause to your candidates and your organizers? A couple of key pieces of business before we let you guys go. Election day is Tuesday. It's a week from today. Polls are open, I believe, from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you go to njpen.com, we will have our patented election day ballot guide, where you'll have a link out to your polling place, to your sample ballot. It'll have the breakdowns of everybody in your race. If you read NJPen, if you value services like this, please become a subscriber. We are free to read, but it is not free to produce. It takes a lot of time. We ask you to sign up and make a financial contribution to keep it going. I got a kid too, and so it takes a lot for him to be quiet, so thanks to my kid as well. I appreciate you all very much for coming out, and we'll see you at the polls. Thanks.